The Goddess of Zinda. In the ancient land of Zinda, tucked deep within the thick, green hills of West Africa, a village once thrived in peace and harmony. The sun kissed the earth generously, the rivers flowed like liquid silver, and the drums of celebration were a constant beat of life. Families lived close, bound by kinship and love, and for many years, Zinda was a place of laughter, joy, and the simple rhythm of village life. But everything changed the night Lishana arrived. Lishana was no ordinary being. She came in the dead of night, with a storm swirling behind her, as though the heavens themselves recoiled from her presence. The sky blackened, and the wind howled as though the spirits were warning the village of the danger to come. But it was too late. The men saw her first. Those who caught even the briefest glimpse of her lost their senses. They were mesmerized by her beauty, by the way she moved with a grace that seemed otherworldly, her skin dark and luminous like the night sky, her eyes glowing with a fiery red that burned with the promise of eternal desire. The next morning, the first men left their homes, their wives, their children, and followed Lishana to her palace at the edge of the village. The women of Zinda watched in confusion and horror. Their husbands, once loving and devoted, walked out of their lives as if hypnotized. When they tried to speak to them, the men did not answer. Their eyes were glassy, and their minds belonged to someone else. They left without a word, without looking back, and disappeared into Lishana's embrace. At first, the woman thought it was a trick, a curse that would soon fade. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became clear, Lishana had taken their men. Her power was beyond anything they could understand. She was no mere woman, she was a goddess, ancient and malevolent, who fed on the desire and vitality of men. And she was immortal. The village changed quickly. Laughter was replaced with sorrow. The once lively marketplace, where men and women had worked together, now echoed with the lonely cries of abandoned wives and heartbroken mothers. The fields lay fallow, the animals roamed untended, and the houses, once full of life, stood empty and cold. Zinda became a ghost of its former self. But the suffering did not end there. Lishana's hunger grew, and soon she began to call the younger men, the boys who had barely reached manhood. Fathers and sons, brothers and cousins, all were drawn to her. She enslaved them with her beauty, trapping them in her palace. They no longer belonged to themselves, only to her. For years, the women of Zinda watched as their men were swallowed by Lishana's insatiable greed, powerless to stop it. The women spoke among themselves, whispering curses against the goddess, but none dared to confront her. They knew what happened to those who tried. One woman, Obia, the wife of a brave hunter, had marched up to Lishana's palace one evening, demanding the return of her husband. The next morning, her body was found at the edge of the village, her eyes wide open in terror, her lips frozen in a silent scream. She had died not from a wound, but from pure fear. From that day on, no one spoke of confronting Lishana again. The years passed, and Lishana remained the same, eternally beautiful, eternally young. She never aged, and her power only grew stronger as she consumed the lives of the men she had enslaved. The village was a shell, inhabited only by women who mourned silently, their tears long dried but their hearts shattered. Children grew up without fathers, wives lived in eternal widowhood, and hope, once abundant in Zinda, became as rare as the rain. But in the shadows of this despair, one girl watched and waited. Ajani was born just as Lishana's reign began. Her mother, like all the women of the village, raised her alone. Ajani never knew her father, he had disappeared into Lishana's palace before she had learned to walk. From her earliest years, she felt the weight of the village's sorrow, and though she was young, she carried the pain of her people in her heart. Unlike the others, though, Ajani did not fear Lishana. No, her heart burned with something else, anger. Anger at the goddess who had destroyed her family, who had brought so much pain to the people she loved. As Ajani grew, her anger turned into determination. She sought out the elders, those who still remembered the old ways, the stories of gods and spirits, of curses and magic. She learned the ancient rites, listened to the whispers of the wind, and spoke to the spirits of the ancestors. Ajani was different. She was not content to suffer silently as her mother and the other women did. She believed that there was a way to stop Lishana, to break the curse, but it would take more than just courage. It would take sacrifice. One night, as the moon hung low and red in the sky, Ajani approached her mother with a plan. Her mother wept, for she knew the dangers, but she also knew there was no stopping Ajani. She had been born for this moment. And so, with her mother's blessing and the prayers of the village women, Ajani set off toward Lishana's palace, knowing that she might never return. The path to the palace was lined with the shadows of the men who had been lost to Lishana. They wandered the grounds like ghosts, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Ajani's heart ached as she passed them, knowing that among them were fathers and sons, brothers and husbands, now nothing more than puppets under Lishana's control. But she steeled herself and continued forward. Inside the palace, Lishana awaited her. The goddess lay on a bed of golden silk, surrounded by her harem of enslaved men. Her eyes gleamed as she saw Ajani enter. She smiled, a cruel and knowing smile, as though she had expected this moment for years. "So," Lishana purred, her voice soft but filled with malice. "You've come to join the others? Or perhaps you think you can fight me?" Ajani stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. "I have come to end your reign." Lishana laughed, a sound that echoed through the palace like the hiss of a snake. "You are but a child. Do you think you are the first to try? Do you think you are special? You will end up like the others, broken, powerless, forgotten." But Ajani did not waver. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the mirror she had carried with her, a gift from the village seer, who had told her that this was the key to defeating Lishana. The mirror was small and old, its surface cracked, but it had the power to reveal the truth, Lishana's true self, hidden beneath her illusion of beauty. As Ajani held up the mirror, Lishana's smile faltered. She looked into the glass and, for the first time in centuries, saw not her perfect, ageless reflection, but the truth of what she had become. Her face twisted and contorted, her skin cracked and rotted, and her eyes, once glowing with power, now reflected only the darkness of her soul. She was a creature of despair, of greed and death, and the mirror showed it all. With a scream of rage, Lishana lunged at Ajani, but the mirror's power was too strong. It stripped away her immortality, her beauty, her strength. Her body withered, crumbling to dust as the truth of her existence consumed her. The men, now free from her spell, blinked in confusion, their minds returning to them as Lishana's palace collapsed around them. Carrying with her not just the freedom of the men, but the hope of her village. Lishana's reign was over. The goddess who had brought so much pain and suffering to Zinda was gone, and for the first time in generations, the people could breathe again. The village welcomed Ajani as a hero, and though the scars of Lishana's tyranny would never fully heal, the people of Zinda began to rebuild, with Ajani's bravery as the light that guided them forward. The legend of Ajani, the girl who faced the goddess and won, would be told for centuries, a story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who refused to be broken.